Hello and welcome. My name is Thomas Kevin Dolan. I am the writer and author of Little Fag, A Journey of Self-Acceptance and Healing. Today I'm going to read chapter 2, which begins on page 192 of my memoir, and it's entitled, It Wasn't a Cry for Help. I'm tired, she said. I'd like to die. I didn't understand, but I chose to listen. It was imperative that I listen. For 6 years, my sister had battled cancer. My beautiful, loving, dazzling sister. My biggest cheerleader, my dearest friend. She opened my heart with her courage. She showed me what it was like to be tenacious, to be stubborn in the face of adversity and clear about what was most important in life. She would say for most of her adult life, life is love. I loved hearing that from her, mainly because no Dolan ever shared a philosophy like that. Her son had called me and asked if I could come to Calgary. It seemed like it was time to say goodbye. As I knelt beside her, with many other people there to support her, I gently whispered, "Are you ready to leave?" Her tiny index finger raised to her lips, and I heard a gentle shh. A few hours later, she sat up, turned to her husband and said, "I love you." She gently eased back into my and my younger sister's arms. Her hands squeezed mine a little tighter, and my other sister holding her other hand. She spoke again, gazing directly into my eyes. "Help, please." I understood. She didn't need my help in keeping her alive. She needed my help to let go. I whispered to her, "You are loved, you can leave." I felt her hand lessen its grip on mine. With one gentle breath, no struggle whatsoever, she left. What I braved. It began in 1973 when, as a junior high school student, a dear friend was killed in a car accident. I vowed I would never want to touch a dead body. His funeral was an open casket, which I was not prepared for. Instead of the viewing helping me to accept his death, it really frightened me. I must have made a pact with myself because, for all the Dolans I have buried, my vow remains steadfast not to touch their bodies, with the exception of my sister in 2012. As my younger sister and I held her, she drew her last breath, and suddenly my sister wasn't at my side anymore. I was the only one holding her hand, which still felt warm. Her husband and son, both devastated by the news, were not by her side. I remember finally standing up, looking down at my sister's body, sensing and actually not recognizing her as being my sister. I must have laid her hands across her chest, but I didn't have a memory of doing that. Her husband eventually came over, gave her a long, heartbreaking hug, and kissed her goodbye. I'm sure her son did as well, but that memory escapes me. I felt this calling to protect what used to be my sister. I remained by her side. I remember hearing that a nurse, who was coming to administer some pain medication, was expected in an hour or so. My sister took her last breath on her sofa at home, and all I could think of doing was to keep her warm. So I made sure the blanket she was already draped in was snugly tucked around her. Perhaps strangest for me, up until this point in time, was not feeling scared around her body. I felt sad, rather exhausted, and hyper-vigilant about any movement towards her. My older brother stopped by to say his goodbye. My sister's eldest, estranged son returned to say his farewell. Both of them, and perhaps others, took time to be with her body. I felt no fear. Calmness seemed to envelope me. Suddenly, I remembered a funny conversation my sister and I had maybe a year before this fateful night. She asked me to come to Calgary so that we could visit some of our relatives that were buried at several cemeteries in the city. Her request seemed out of sorts for my sister. I asked, "Why do you want to do that?" She replied, "I want to make sure they know they are not forgotten." I agreed. We set a date. For what we were now calling, and more specifically for what she was now calling, the Dead Dolan Tour, I arrived in Calgary and called her, asking her to call me back so I could stop by and pick her up. After 7 or 8 messages, I realized my sister did not want to go. She never returned my call. In subsequent visits, we never spoke of the tour or the lack of a tour, although she did at one point in time say, "I wonder if anyone held them when they died." This was not a sentiment I ever heard my sister ponder before, but clearly it resonated with me because I'm writing about it. The nurse finally arrived. She was devastated that my sister had died. She knelt beside me, reaching out to stroke my sister's hair, and gently said, "You can rest now." She turned directly to me and said, "You must be Thomas. She spoke a lot about you." That, of course, triggered another stream of tears. She quietly asked, "Do you want to help me wash your sister and change your clothes?" For just a moment, I felt terror sweep through my body. Yet with a breath and a glance down at my sister, I looked back to her and said, "Thank you for the honor." My younger sister and my sister's son both went to retrieve an outfit for her. My only comment as I trailed down the hallway was, "Make sure it's a warm outfit." Barriers have a way of crashing down when it's vital that you support the people you love. I knew this wasn't just a dead Dolan. This was my dear sister, yet in some way, it wasn't her. The nurse gave me the time I needed before we began. I cried, I hugged my sister, I gently touched her, and I talked to her for a bit. With the task at hand, the nurse invited me to wear rubber gloves. I made the conscious choice to forgo the latex gloves for this ritual. She had gathered up the materials, warm water, and cloths that we would need for washing her body. There was something profoundly sacred about what I was doing. Once my sister was clean and dried, my sister's son handed us the clothes that were chosen. In the end, my sister was fitted with a snuggly sweater that had a cowl neck, fresh underwear, a pair of warm woolen tights, and to ensure her feet didn't get cold, a heavy pair of socks. The nurse and I worked together to get her dressed. I nervously laughed a bit, saying, "It's difficult to dress someone who's not cooperating." When we were done, tears streamed down my face. The change was so remarkable. Once she was dressed, she looked so cozy, warm, relaxed, and comfortable. She looked like herself, but it wasn't her. I laid my head on my sister's chest. I spoke to her, telling her how much I loved her and missed her. I squeezed her hand, which was cold now, and let her know it was time for her to go. I quietly went to those gathered in the room to let them know they could now go over and say the goodbyes. It broke my heart to watch her husband and son say goodbye. As my sister and I escorted our sister's body out to the funeral home's awaiting van, I realized what I braved. I allowed myself to receive a gift from my sister. I allowed love to rule my heart and not fear. Only my sister could have inspired that shift. The unlearning. There were few Dolans who stood for anything, not a principle, not a moral, not an ethic, but my sister stood for love. It was rare to hear her say that she did, but her actions always spoke louder than her words. She was a staunch defender of what she felt was right, and God help you if you opposed her. During a track and field practice, she was in grade 7, I was in grade 9, she dared to tell the track coach that his measurement of the space between the hurdles was wrong. I encouraged her not to say anything, She screamed her truth. "It's my race, not his," she blurted out. I cringed, becoming as small as I could. It only took one tumble on run number 1 before she sprinted up the coach and rapidly pointed out his error. That slight adjustment, hers, not the coach's, would garner her a first-place ribbon in our annual track meet. I was proud of her. She taught me about standing up for myself. We were 5 young siblings, ranging from elementary school to junior high school age. For some strange reason, we were spread over 3 different schools. She and I marched off every day to St. Peter's, onto the number 4 West bus that came at 8:15 a.m. Our favorite bus driver welcomed us on board. He really liked my sister. I'd find a seat mid-bus, but my sister would stand at the front of the bus, chatting with the driver. I often wonder if he represented the father she never had. I loved hearing her laugh. She regularly looked back at me as if to say, "I'm good." She was in charge of ringing the bell for our stop on 10th Street and Kensington Road. Hell hath no fury, like a sister derived of ringing the bell for our stop. It was a line I'd never cross. We'd then transfer to a second bus, riding up a mile or so, and off we'd jump. There was no such joy knowing my travels were. There was such joy knowing that my travels were safe with my sister. I always felt she was the brave one. Our school knew me as the big brother. My sister told me once that she loved people asking her if I was her, if she was my little sister. She'd share, "It reminds me of how powerful we are together. And besides, I love people, and I love that they recognize that." There was a wisdom about her that I thought came from a place many Dolans had not been. Our plan usually was to meet after school and reverse our bus course back home. But on this day, at our designated corner, in front of a convenience store, there was a gathering of kids who seemed to be taunting someone. I caught a glimpse of my sister in the crowd. I sprinted across the school ground and made my way to the front of the gathering. The owner of the store, an older man, was screaming at my sister while using his body to block some of her friends from leaving the store. I caught my breath and said to her, "What's going on?" With fire in her eyes and a look of desperation I had not seen in my sister, she informed me, "That old man has accused some of my friends of stealing and won't allow them to get out of the store." "Sir," I yelled, "it's not legal for you to keep those kids trapped in your store." The owner lunged at me, thinking he could grab me. Not a good idea with my sister standing there. With a swiftness I'd only seen her display on the running track, my sister countered the man's lunge, pushing him off balance, and then screamed for her friends to run. All hell broke loose. We, my sister, with me and a pack of screaming teenagers right on her heels, all bolted for the sidewalk, which we thought was safely off the store owner's property. He began to chase me. I narrowly avoided his frantic fists aimed at my head. I was terrified. Memories and an adrenaline rush from the morning of violent outbreaks in our home aided my escape. Although I wouldn't have drawn the analogy of Mama Bear for my sister, she quickly intervened, teasing the store owner like she was a rodeo clown. He hadn't a clue what was going on. Not only did she weave in and out of his grasp, but she also let loose a barrage of profanity that I never heard her utter before. Her warnings to the store owner, based on him even thinking of touching me, would embarrass most fishermen. The store owner stopped and screamed something at us while we all drifted away. The gaggle of friends swarmed my sister, bellowing out compliments of her bravery. "I don't care who they are," she said, still slightly out of breath, "but nobody touches the people I love." On that day, I rode the bus home with my guardian angel. I discovered qualities of her I never knew. We remained quiet for most of the ride, but I do remember her whispering, "I wish I could have been that brave when Dad beat up Mom." I started to cry. Her hand gently fell on my knee. The unlearning for me, because of the bravery of my sister and the fact that she showed me the power of boundaries, she also taught me to never underestimate the power of love. My dear Sister Anne, a force to be reckoned with. We were inseparable while we were growing up. We were known as the track stars, both sprinters, both very fast. And I can still remember heading into Glenmore Stadium where the track meet was. It was so far away. It was in southwest Calgary. We were in northwest Calgary. Our school was in northwest Calgary, but it was a gathering of schools in the district. And I felt so proud to walk with my sister. And I remember the first track meet, because she was in grade 7, her first track meet, I was in grade 9. It would be my third track meet. I kind of knew what was going on. She didn't have a clue. So I felt so proud to kind of move her through all of this, through this sporting event. I felt really proud to move her through it. She was in awe that a lot of people knew me. She liked watching me in the heats, win the heats to move on to the finals later in the afternoon. I didn't know what to expect. I watched her practice, and of course, because we ran around as children, I knew she was fast, but I had no idea. So when she won her first heat, it was so exciting. And I remember going over and giving her a big hug, and she screamed, going, "I won, I won." And I reminded her that that was the race she had won to get herself into the final, which she'd need to run in the afternoon. So she'd run again. I said, "You have to run again. And it's in that race, right, if you win," she said to me, "if." And of course she did. That and many other races. So we had this bond, right? And there would come a time where the bond would change, right? She would discover different interests. She'd discover boys. I couldn't discover boys. The closeted gay boy, right? She discovered cigarettes. I didn't discover cigarettes. She discovered partying. That scared me, right? That was not something that worked for me. So in a sense, we kind of parted being connected. She would end up going to St. Francis. I didn't go to that school. She didn't graduate from that school. But she met some people that were pretty important to her in her life. So although we didn't necessarily walk the same path, and although the bond wasn't as strong as it used to be, we always had a connection. But we always had a connection. And although I didn't spend as much time with her as I possibly could, she was so powerfully supportive of my coming out. She was disappointed, though. Let me backtrack. She was disappointed that for some reason she thought she'd be chosen by my wife to be a bridesmaid. My wife didn't know my sister at all. And I didn't know in the protocol that that was something that typically happened. At least that's what my mother said. So I didn't believe that story to be true. But my sister was a little pissed that she wasn't part of my wedding party. So I had invited her to do other things, to support me, decorating the hall, doing different things like that. So in some way she was there. But for some reason she was extra happy that the married relationship ended. And she was powerfully supported and supportive of me coming out. So I think she somehow was involved in a different aspect of my life. Right? Not my wedding, but she was the first one to show up and meet the person I'd fallen in love with and be powerfully supportive. So to this day, I whisper to my sister all the time because I have an energetic connection to her now. And I figured out the help please, took some therapy to figure that out. The help please was her asking the spirit in me to support the spirit in her, the soul in me to support the soul in her in leaving. And she left so quickly, and she left so easily. So easily. So I'm proud, again, that in that moment directly with her as she drew her last breath, again, I heard her, and I could be there to support her.